Well, the two-day meeting of NATO's defense ministers has come to an end in Brussels. The officials reviewed the security situation in Afghanistan and also military ties with the European Union. They touched on a possible trade war following a fallout among G7 members. So for more on all this, we are now joined live by our correspondent Mariam Zaidi, who's standing by for us in Brussels. Mariam, it's great to have you with us today. So were any concrete results really achieved during these talks?
Well, you know, as you were saying, the defence ministers have now, of course, wrapped up their two-day meeting, and they've pledged more support and continued funding to the Afghan government and Afghan security forces. And, of course, they've also welcomed the recently brokered ceasefire with the Taliban. Now, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg lauded what he called the real progress of Afghan forces to conduct offensive operations, and it's also expected that allies will of course extend funding for the Afghan security forces till 2024 at the NATO Summit of Heads of State, so the big NATO summit that's going to be taking place in mid-July. NATO of course says that the Afghan security forces are very essential to maintaining peace in Afghanistan. And more good news is that ahead of the July summit, all NATO allies have reversed their defence spending cuts, and the majority are now going to put forward plans to spend 2% on defence by 2024. Germany in particular plans to increase their defence spending by 80% over the next decade, so that's a big leap for Germany. No doubt all of this is of course going to be very much welcomed by the US President Donald Trump.
One thing that's high on Trump's agenda as well, though, Mariam, is of course trade. I imagine that's been a big discussion topic there. So what have they been saying?
Well, I think wherever you are in the world, no doubt many have been entertained by the epic Twitter ranting that we saw last evening between the leaders of France, Canada and the US, even if it possibly wasn't the most responsible of them all. But none of that at the NATO defence ministers meeting. You know, as all sort of, you could say, hell was breaking loose elsewhere ahead of the G7 summit, the NATO ministers were just 100% zen, you could say. Not only did they up the ante on defence spending, commit more long-term to their mission in Afghanistan, they've also signed off on better transatlantic cooperation by building 2 new hubs, one in Germany and one in Virginia in the United States. This is all part of a new NATO command structure. And the NATO Secretary General, who's not normally one really to be drawn into non-NATO or non-defence matters, did in fact comment on what is really going on elsewhere in the world. He said that despite the differences between NATO allies on issues like trade, that NATO itself is delivering on collective defence and is in the midst of its biggest reinforcement to their collective defence since the end of the Cold War. So take that, everyone else.